Welcome to the Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast. And now your host, EYAL Levy.
I want to take a second and tell you about something that I am very excited about, and it's the URM Summit. Once a year, we hold an event where hundreds of producers from all over the world come together for 4 days of networking, workshops, seminars, and hanging out. This industry is all about relationships, and think about it. What could you gain from getting to personally know your peers from all over the world who have the same goals as you, the same struggles as you, and who can help inspire you, motivate you, as well as become potential professional collaborators? This year's summit is on November 9th through 11th at the Las Vegas Westin, which is just one block off of the Strip, and it's going to be even bigger and better than ever. We're anticipating even more producers, plus a lineup of amazing guests like Jens Bogren, Chris Crummett, Machine, Forrester Savell, Mike Kalajian, Dave Otero, Billy Decker, Chris Adler, Mary Zimmer, Mike Mowery, Jesse Cannon, Blasco, Jason Leckberg, Jessica Lohan, and more. And of course, our musical guest, the one and only Arcspire. So get your summit tickets now at urmsummit.com, and we will see you in Vegas. Today on the URM podcast, my guest is Mr. Dave Schiffman, who is a producer and two-time Grammy Award-winning engineer and mixer out of LA. You can hear Schiffman's work on music of all stripes, from jazz to grindcore. He's worked with legendary artists such as Audioslave, Tom Petty, Vampire Weekend, La Dispute, Adele, Jimmy Eat World, and many, 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 many more. I'm not going to spend the next hour going down the list, so look it up. Anyways, Dave, how are you doing? Thanks for being here.
I'm doing good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you. I have a question for you, something interesting that I noticed in my prep, which is something that I think we can all relate to. It says here that, you could be working with some huge act 1 month, but then if there's a cancellation, you could go an entire month without work. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit because I think that up-and-comers think that type of thing ends once you become quote-unquote successful. And I just don't.
Yeah.
I just don't think that's true.
No, I wish. Unfortunately, you're kind of at the. If you are engineering, you're at the will of the producer and band and the record company. If they decide, you know what, we're not ready to go into the studio right now, we're going to hold off. You don't really have any recourse there. I know that there are some record companies, some management companies, whatever, will make a deal. We'll get somebody paid for a partial payment for canceled work, but you can't really count on it.
That's sometimes,
Right.
That's
right.
That's if they're cool.
Yeah.
I've definitely had that go both ways. The worst one, and this was my stupidity. So, feel free to tell me I'm stupid. But I started working on a project, and I knew the label involved personally.
Right.
And this band was getting signed to them, and I guess they didn't tell me that the deal wasn't finished when the studio was booked.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So I had confirmed the studio time with the band. Label said, go for it. Figured if the label's saying go for it, it's go for it. So week 1 goes by, and I should have gotten some sort of down payment or first half or something
right.
a while ago.
Right.
But I figure I know these people, they're my friends. I'm sure it'll come. Week 2, it's like, what is going on? There's no money. I'm buying the band food, and what is this? Turns out they didn't even sign the deal, and then the deal fell through.
Oh.
So on week 3, and then the band disintegrated. So all these weeks of unpaid work. It was my stupidity for not doing enough due diligence. But sometimes I feel like sometimes there's some scenarios where you just think shit's going to be okay.
Absolutely.
Because you've known people for a long time.
Yeah. And I think, everybody has the best intentions, but communication is critical. And I have to credit my managers, past and present, for really staying on top of that, because that's something that I think if I had to be responsible for that, I'm sure I would have gone down the same route you did, because you don't want to come off to the band as being, financially driven. I don't know if that's the right term. I guess.
Yeah. It makes it awkward.
Right. I try and make it a rule not to really discuss business with the band in the studio. That just always feels like bad juju to me. It just, it can make for uncomfortable conversations, and for people going, well, wait, I didn't know that's what they were paying you, or, things like that. And I really don't want to bring that into the studio if I can help it. So it's really, it's important to have it all worked out before you walk in the door, and to be upfront, and to be as like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to confirm studio time until I've got something signed from you guys, or a PO that says we are good to go. And I totally don't blame you for doing what you did, because had I not been, under a good manager and somebody who taught me all this, I wouldn't have known any different, and I probably would have done the same exact thing.
I should have known better. I already knew this by this point in time.
Right.
It was like the one time that I let it slide.
Yeah.
Because I knew everyone involved personally.
Sure.
And of course, those are the times that it gets you.
Always. You're right. It's like when you're not on top of stuff, that's when it happens. That's when it falls through the cracks. To this day, I still, run into that. Hopefully not on a large scale, but there'll always be something where I'm like, oh, damn it, we should have talked about that, or, oh, wait a second, am I on the hook for that? I shouldn't be on the hook for that. And that's, that definitely, bad on my part for not, being prepared and having it all figured out. But,
it's one of these things too, where, you can only plan for what you can plan for. And there's a certain element of just us not being psychic that comes into play. Though I do think in this situation I was talking about, it was my fault. I messed that one up. But there are things that you just can't really totally plan for. You can't get every single detail.
No, you're absolutely right. But I guess part of doing what we do is, or I found anyway, is being able to anticipate. And it's like, it's something that drives my wife nuts, actually, because I'm the guy who, she'll say, well, let's go here. And I'll say, well, if we go there, aren't we going to hit a lot of traffic? Or, it's like, that's how my brain works, where I'm always trying to think 2 or 3 steps ahead, instead of, okay, we're just going to do this and, let the chips fall where they may. And I feel like because of, what it is I do for a living, my career has really shaped that part of my brain. And it's, it's a blessing and a curse. As I'm sure she'll tell you, because it's just like, I just become the bummer, because I'm like, oh, well, we can't do that, because, and she'll be like, oh, yeah, great. Okay, thanks. So it's double-edged sword, I guess.
Well, what did you do before you had management? How did you navigate these waters?
Well, that was part of me seeking out management. Was I was working with a producer pretty much full time, and the work was good. There wasn't an issue with money or anything like that. But every once in a while, there would be a booking for, say a month or even like a week or something. And then literally like the day we were supposed to start, it would get canceled or it would get postponed.
Ouch.
And I'd be sitting there like, holy shit, what am I going to do now? I was counting on this money coming in. This is how I was going to pay my rent. This is how I was going to pay my taxes or whatever. And then it's not there, or it's going to be there, but, nobody's told me when. So I was in no position to, ask for, half of the payment up front or any sort of a cancel fee or anything like that, because I just didn't know any better. I just thought, well, that's how the cookie crumbles. That's what you get. And that was when I thought, I see all these other people I know who work with managers. Maybe it's time I talk to somebody. And I did. And that started a relationship with a manager who I was with for 21 years. And
wow.
And it was great. And, he really taught me a lot and, had my back on a lot of that stuff and made sure, I was just a little more comfortable. I could breathe a little easier. That's to say, just be a little more sure of what was coming down the line.
I think a lot of people have a misconception about what a manager does.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people think that a manager's job is to get you the work. And I think that maybe that happens sometimes, but I really think their job is to make sure that everything is legit and on the up and up with the work that you're getting, and that nobody is that you're in the best possible scenario with the jobs. And maybe sometimes they'll get work, but I don't think that that's their number one job.
You're absolutely right. I think maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was a little more of a A&R people would send demos to managers, and managers would, send it to the client they felt appropriate, or the couple of clients they felt appropriate. And, he'd report back to the A&R guy, well, so-and-so's interested, so-and-so's interested. But since the A&R structure at most big labels and probably a lot of the smaller ones has changed, that isn't really how it goes anymore. I think there still is some of that, but there's a lot less of it. And I think right now, the manager's job is to make sure, like you said, that it's all above board and that you're being treated fairly, and that, you're going to walk away satisfied with the deal. And, obviously he's going to profit from that as well, or he or she, I should say. So it's supposed to be a win-win kind of thing, I guess.
At what point do you think is a good idea as a producer to seek out representation?
I think when your representation has something to sell you on.
Fair enough.
If you haven't really accomplished, a significant credit, something that has, gotten the attention of either the press or the public or, the inner circle of people who make records, then I think it's really hard for management to go out and, help you negotiate a deal or help put you in a situation where you can find work.
Absolutely.
Because if they're recommending you to somebody, recommending you to a label or a manager or, what have you, their first question is going to be, well, who's that? I've never heard of them.
Oh, it's just some guy I know.
Yeah.
It's funny. There's some misconceptions about lots of these roles in the music industry. Like, it's about publicists too.
Yeah.
As well as what a label will and won't do. But I think the common bond here is that these people need something to work with.
Right.
They can't create something out of nothing. And they're not magicians. They do their job based off of what you give them to do their job with.
And that goes for record companies also.
Yeah, totally.
I've worked with a lot of first timer bands, who are making their first record, and sometimes we have these conversations where the band feels like, okay, well, or all their dreams have come true, their success, and it's like, and the first thing I say to most of them is like, you don't understand. I was like, this is the easy part. Making the record is the easy, fun part. I was like, after this is when the work starts. Now you have to go out and sell yourself, not just, 9 to 5, 24/7. You are on the clock. You are selling your band. And, that may sound
like you're running for office.
Exactly. And that may sound really kind of harsh and, corporate like, but it's like, if you want this to be what you do for a living, then, it is a tough gig. It is not, it doesn't just, nobody walks up and hands you the keys to the kingdom. You have to go steal them, and you have to go out there and do what you need to do. You know, you got to get into a van and go play clubs. You got to go play in front of 8 people the first time, hoping that next time there'll be 16 people. You know, it is a tough road. And for bands who don't understand that and don't get that, you know, it's going to be a rude awakening, or it's just not going to happen, you know.
Speaking of tough roads, as a producer, you definitely worked your way up over quite a long period of time. But from what you said yourself was the gopher position.
Right.
And I've noticed that, and this bugs me whenever I see this. I see some people who say they want to do this, say they're not willing to put up with they want the gigs with these big producers, but they don't want to go through that gopher period. And I'm wondering, what did you learn through that gopher period, and how did it help you get to the next step?
I think it's a great lesson in humility, and also just understanding that there really is a lot you don't know. And, you know, you learn it from observation and from watching how other people do it. And, you know, the hierarchy has changed a lot. In, you know, back when I was starting out, the way you got in was you started out as a runner, and, you know, you would help when the assistant got an engineering gig, you would be his assistant. So he would kind of show you the ropes. You know, this is how you set up. This is how you break down. This is how you wrap a mic cord. This is how you plug in a mic. You know, and, you know, they taught you everything. And it's like, and this is how our studio does this. This is how our studio does that. And, you know, that was how you learned it. And now that the studio world has shrunk dramatically, I think people who are trying to break in, there's a bunch of different routes to go in, but it's a lot less. I mean, not that there was any security to begin with, but now it's like, I don't even know how I would suggest somebody work their way in. You know, there are still studios where you can get a job, but, you know, very few. And, you know, most people are booking time at studios, myself included. For a record, you will book a room for 4 to 5 days. You get the drums, and then you move out and you go someplace else.
I mean, even though it's changed to where there aren't as many big studios, that doesn't mean there's no producers. I mean, you need an assistant or assistants, right?
Yes and no. I mean, like it's imperative. Like if I'm at somebody else's studio, yes, I need somebody who can interface with the room and who can get stuff set up and, you know, get me to where I need to be to start working. If I'm in my own room, no, I don't need anybody else. And it's set up that way on purpose, because these days what I need to do is I need to do everything I can to keep my costs down. And, you know, most producers will tell you the same thing. It's like, you know, because we live in the world of the all-in deal. It's like,
yep,
I'm going to pay you X amount of dollars to do this work. And it's, you know, at 20% of what it was maybe 10 years ago. So you've got to figure out how to make that make sense for you.
And so you lone wolf it basically once you're back at your place?
Yeah, once I'm back at my place, there's really no reason to have somebody there. I'm fairly self-sufficient. You know, I put together my whole setup, so I know where everything is. And so it doesn't make sense for me to have somebody there. You know, it'd be great to have somebody there, like once the mix was done, I could say, okay, run off the mixes and I'll see you later. That would be great. And I know guys who do that, but I just haven't really found the reason to have somebody to come in and do that. Not that there aren't qualified people, and not that, you know, there's plenty of people who have hit me up about it, but I just can't rationalize it. And I would feel bad, honestly, to have somebody sitting there on my couch waiting for me to ask them to do something, because it may be a couple of days before I need somebody to help me.
Sounds like you've got it figured out.
I think for how I make records and for what I do, I feel like I do. I feel like I've got like my system down in a way that it works right.
Sounds like you've got your workflow dialed to where it is machine-like in its efficiency, because I don't think there's a way to pull off what you're describing without having just a machine-like workflow.
Well, I think it's the workflow needed to be in such a way that I could work on multiple things at the same time. And this is all just a matter of survival. Like around 2008, I think it was, when, kind of the proverbial shit hit the fan and all the big labels, slaughtered their rosters. They dropped tons of bands, tons of artists. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the tipping point. That was like, okay, well, that first record budget of $175,000, well, now it's $20,000. And you know what? We want the record to sound exactly the same. And so
sounds brutal.
How do you do that? Yeah. How do you make that work and still manage to put food on the table, doing what you love? That was the thing. It's like, there really isn't anything else I'm qualified to do. And there really isn't anything else that I want to do. So, out of that desperation, I had to figure out, how am I going to keep doing this and being able to, provide for my family and myself.
What's interesting here is that so people whose careers came about after 2008, $20,000 is a pretty good budget to them, because they didn't know any different. But for the guys from before then, it's like having to learn how to work under brand new parameters where your resources for a project are just slashed.
Right.
So you've solved the problem through efficiency and workflow, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think that's what it's about. And also, it's about artists kind of understanding that, and management and record companies, and, being like, okay, well, you know what? I know that you need to jump on to this other project for a couple of days. So you do that, and then you come back to us and do this. And, it's kind of like, it's like juggling. And, everybody kind of has to be on board. And, look, not every record I do is a $20,000 budget. There's, I've definitely still worked on records that have significant budgets, and those are awesome. And it's great to be a part of them, and it's usually amazing artists, and it's usually, working at a real nice studio and all that. And there's still that still does exist. But I'd say for the most part, if you work like in the independent world and the DIY world, that doesn't exist. So you have to figure out how to make that work for your, how you want to live, your lifestyle.
So can we talk a little bit about the nitty-gritty of your workflow? You say you have to bounce between projects a lot. Are you 100% in the box with mixes, or do you have a system for quick recalls with analog? How do you do it?
Well, I'd say I'm a hybrid in the box and analog. What I do is I mix through the Shadow Hills Equinox, which is a breakout box of 32 channels. It's 20, so it's I guess 24 or 12 stereo channels, 24 tracks, and then 8 mono tracks that come down to a stereo blend. From there, I go into a fully analog chain that goes into a Burl A to D converter back into Pro Tools, and that's how I print my mix. So the only thing that I have to document is my analog stereo bus chain, which is something that I'm always trying to tune up and looking for different ways to get the best, to get it to sound as much like a console as I can, to the point where I think it sounds right, or it sounds to me like, it doesn't sound like it's in the box, to where it sounds like it is like a more natural, desky sounding mix.
Now, a lot of the guys I know who are former all analog guys who are now working hybrid, who are in a situation kind of like you where they have to be able to jump around a lot. What they do, or what they've told me that they do, is that the analog gear side of things, those settings never change. And
Right.
so they have different pieces for different purposes, and all they tweak is, the input level.
Right.
And that is set for what it's, for its purpose. And that's that.
Right.
And they don't mess with that. Do you kind of go about it that way?
I wish I did, but I don't.
Didn't sound like you did. That's what I was wondering.
I really don't. And, and I want to say I totally get it that, there are guys out there that do that, and they have the extensive amount of gear that they can do that, if you have five...
Yeah, that's exactly right. They'll
five
have
1176s or, 4 LA2As. If you have that and you can do that, more power to you. That's great. But I don't. I have some really nice gear. I don't have a ton of it, but I have enough to where, okay, I want to run this vocal through my 2254. So I'll do that. I'll find something that I like in terms of how it reacts with the track and how it sounds with the vocal. And then I print it. And there's my vocal sound with the 2254 in the computer. Now, if I decide somewhere along the way, that's not really working for me anymore. Well, then I'll try it through my 1176, or I'll go back through the 2254 and I'll change my my threshold or my compression or something like that, and then I'll print it again and I'll put it on a playlist and I'll say, okay, this was 2254 number 2. Okay, this one sits better. And I'll do that with, all the outboard gear I use. And that way, when I do recall it, well, all the outboard gear stuff is printed. So I don't have to go back and recall it. And if I want that 2254 on 6 tracks or 20 tracks, I can do that. And I can change the setting for however I want it to sound or do, and I print it, and it's there.
I mean, do you have like a notebook full of all these recalls?
Well, for the recalls for my stereo bus, yes, I have a template for the EQ. The stereo bus EQ that I like, and I have I document my compressor settings and my. I just recently bought a piece from a company called Tree Audio, and it's called a trunk. TRUNK for it's funny, and essentially all it is, it's a full monitoring system, but what I'm using it for right now is just the stereo bus, because it's this tube stereo bus that's kind of at the end of my chain right now, or not at the total end of my chain, but I guess right after my EQ. Yeah, so I guess it's like the end of the chain right now. And that's kind of the last thing my mix is hitting. And you can sit there and you have like a variable output on it, and you can just kind of find the sweet spot like you're running through a console. And I've just found that it translates fantastically. It just really makes this difference that it's hard to articulate what it is.
I'm looking it up right now.
Oh, okay. It's hard to articulate what it does, but it just sounds better. And
just does something good.
I apologize that I don't have a technical spec to explain it, but it's something where the vocal just becomes a little more focused. The depth becomes a little bit deeper. The reverb becomes a little more three-dimensional. Just things like that. It just kind of opens up the mix, and it just feels more like an analog print. How I remember like half-inch or quarter-inch sounding. And that's kind of been my ultimate goal for my mix chain, is to get it to where I remember going through a console sounds like. and to get that feel, but be able to flip between 3 different records in the same afternoon.
I'm looking at their stuff right now. These are some big boy toys for sure.
Yes, they are, and they're built fantastic. I mean, the thing's built like a tank. It weighs as much as a tree. I mean, it's huge, but it really, really sounds good, paired up with the Equinox especially.
I'm looking at the trunk stereo and bus monitoring section.
Right.
And I see a few things. So you said you have the trunk.
Yes.
Okay. God, that thing does look huge.
Yeah. It's just a
military grade.
Muscular, very muscular. Yeah, with all the military grade like helicopter switches on it. It's pretty cool looking.
Nice. So, question about how you came up.
Yeah.
You came up through the old system of becoming the gopher, then assistant, then working under people. But you didn't just work under a producer. I mean, you worked with Rick Rubin.
Right.
What is it like? I mean, I'm sure you get asked this all the time, but I'm just wondering, what's it like having to keep up with a genius, basically?
It was always, you kind of always had to be ready for anything. It would be a ride. One day we're recording a Qawwali band, from Pakistan, and the next day, we're in with System of a Down. It was just all over the place, and just kind of having to pick up and recalibrate and decide, okay, well, we're recording all acoustic instruments right now, or we're recording a ear-splitting kind of metal, overture. And it was just kind of being ready for whatever he threw at me. And it was great. It was priceless, baptism by fire, but it was amazing. How
did that come about? How did it come about that he was cool to work with you?
Well, it started, I was an assistant at Ocean Way Studios, which is no more. It was Alan Sides' studio in Hollywood. And I was a staff assistant there. I'd been working there, I guess, about a year. I'd moved out from New York. And I was assigned to work with Rick and then engineer Richard Dodd to do vocals on with the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
So you were just assigned?
Yeah, I was assigned. I made it known to the studio manager. I saw it in the book. I was like, "Hey, I'd love to work on that." and she said, "Well, okay, let me see what happens." Because I didn't really have any seniority at that point. I had only been there for about a year, and there were other guys who'd been there. I mean, like 10 years, 12 years, which is crazy. But I ended up on it, and
10 years as assistants.
Yeah, exactly. I don't get it, but I got assigned to the record, which was great. Got in there with Richard and Rick, and Anthony came, and we did some vocals, and then Anthony had some other stuff going on, so he wasn't coming in, but we still had the room. So instead of canceling the room, Rick just threw some other stuff at Richard for him to do. Mix these Jayhawks songs. Let's remix this Tom Petty track. Let's do that. So it was just me and Richard in there, and Richard just remixing all this stuff. Most of it on the monitor side of the console, which was incredible. He's just such a purist and was just such a great sense of balance and. Just really a master of that. And, this was going on for, I guess like a week or something. And then I think, Richard's from Nashville. He had been in LA for a couple of weeks at least. And I think he was ready to go home. I think, he missed his family. He was just kind of, I guess, a little burnt out. So he turns to me one day and he said, well, you know what? I'm heading home next week. Do you want to take over? And I said, seriously?
Just like that?
Yeah. I said, seriously, really? And he's like, yeah. He's like, you're up to it. You can do it. I was like, yes. I was like, I'm down. Sign me up. And he's like, okay, well, I'll talk to Rick's assistant and I guess they'll let you know. And I said, great. So in the meantime, Richard left and they didn't cancel the time for the room. Rick was down the hall. I think Rick might have had like 2 or 3 rooms going at that time. It was, I was in Studio 3 with Richard and the Chili Peppers. He was also in Studio 2 with Danzig. And then around the corner in another room, there was something else going on, and I can't remember what it was. But I think he had 3 rooms going at the same time over at Ocean Way. So very prolific at that point. But there wasn't really anything to do in Studio 3, except I knew that there was a Jayhawks track that needed to be mixed. So I put it up, and I just started to mix it on my own. Worked on it for a day. Printed a cassette. That's right, a cassette mix. And saw Rick walking down the hall heading to 2 one day. And I walked out and I was like, hey, Rick. I said, I just mixed, I think it was Tomorrow the Green Grass was the name of the song. I was like, I just did a mix of this. I know you guys need it. I was like, here, check it out. And if you like it, it'd be great if you used it. And he takes the cassette. He's like, all right, come on back with me. Come back to Studio 2. So go back to Studio 2 and we pop the cassette in and he listens and looks at me and is like, great. He's like, this is cool. Thanks. Thanks for doing that. Then I hear nothing.
Was your mind blown?
I was like, wow, that's pretty cool.
It was that easy.
It was that easy. But it was just, I guess having the nerve to actually do that and, feeling like I was able to back it up at the time. Because I think that's what it's about. If you are going to do something like that, you have to be able to back it up and really stand behind the work.
That's actually where I think most people would fall short, is not taking that chance when it came up. Like, first of all, requesting the Rubin session. I think a lot of people would say, nah, I'm not ready for that, or someone else will just get it, so I'm not even going to try. So I think that's the first place where people would fail on the quest. And then the second place would have been, like say that whoever it is who made it in did a good job. I would assume that no bad engineers would make it to the Rubin session. So that's assumed. But then when the engineer told you he was leaving, do you want to take over? I think there is a group of people who would have been like, nah, out of fear that they'd mess it up.
Sure.
So then the third level is actually having the balls to grab that track that nobody assigned to you. And then the fourth is to actually show it to them. So that's 4 levels right there of where I think a lot of people would just fall off because they're too scared to go forward.
It definitely was a pretty big meatball. And I don't know what possessed me to kind of go for it at that point. I think I had decided, maybe right when I started at Ocean Way that I was going to just give this a couple of years. And if nothing flushed out, then I was going to move on and look for another career or another avenue. So
it was like a Hail Mary?
It was, I guess it was kind of my Hail Mary where I was like, you know what? I have nothing to lose here. It's like, if he likes it, great. If he doesn't like it, well, that's okay too. I mean, I'm not going to lose my job here. I may be stuck here a little longer than I want to be, but, I'm not really going anywhere. So, that's how I rationalized it. And that's how I saw it as kind of, for lack of a better word, safe. Everybody has their own degree of what's safe. And I guess some people may have thought, wow, that's crazy. But it didn't feel that crazy to me at the time. It felt like, this is what needed to happen. It just seemed kind of crystal clear that that was the right way to go.
I mean, it's a big swing, but without taking the swing, you don't hit the grand slam. I mean, there is the possibility of striking out, but I mean, if you don't take the at-bat, you're sealing your own fate.
Exactly. It's like you got to get up to the plate first. And I was lucky that he was receptive about it. And I guess he saw something in that he's like, well, that's somebody who I want in my camp, you know. But it didn't actually come to fruition right then. Like he thanked me for it. He said, great. He's like, I'll see you soon. And then the next week, we started up again, and it was with another engineer doing vocals with Anthony. Like, they didn't hire me. And I was kind of like, okay, well, you know what? I tried, and he didn't laugh at me. And, you know, I feel like I'd made some sort of progress, but then they brought in this other guy to do vocals with Anthony.
Name your accomplishments. Number one, didn't get laughed at by Rick Rubin.
Exactly.
I mean, it's still pretty cool.
Yeah. And so this other guy starts, and he, well, we'll just say he was quite proud of himself, and you know, really thought he had got it all figured out. And
one of those,
you know, yeah. So, you know, one of the things about working at Oshaway, which made it, you know, an incredible opportunity, was that the assistant ran the tape machine. You know, ran the multi-track machine, because they were these old ATR 124s. You know, they were like, we used to call them washing machines, because they were huge. They were massive, and they were really, really, they were touchy. They had, you know, all these little odd things that could go wrong with them, or things that you had to be on top of. Like the remote was this plasma readout, and it could, you know, there were so many ways you could get burned on this remote that most engineers...
Burned as in fuck
make
up
a mistake.
The tape?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like you would be in repro when you were supposed to be in sync, or you could have 2 tracks armed instead of 1, or half of your tracks were in repro and the other half were in sync. You know, fun things like that. And, you know, one of the jobs as the assistant was that you had to know how to run that machine, and you had to be comfortable on it. So, you know, being on staff there, I was. And, you know, the machine was, you know, the machine and I were one. And which was great, because when it was time to do punch-ins and you were sitting there, you know, it was between you and the musician. You know, there wasn't anybody else who was doing this. You know, it was like, you know, the producer, the engineer would tell you, okay, we're going in on bar 7. You know, you got to be like, okay, bar 7. But I knew that I had to anticipate my punch. Whereas most, you know, the old Studer machines, you could punch right on the downbeat, and it was pretty forgiving. It's like, you know, you'd punch in there and it would sound great. If you did that on the ATRs, you'd get this click, or you'd get like, or it would miss, because it took like a millisecond for the bias to come up on these machines. So you had to anticipate your punch. So if you were going in on the downbeat of 1, you had to start punching on the and to get in on the 1.
That's a big anticipation.
Yeah. And it's like, at first, when you first start like messing around with the machine, you feel it, you're like, wow, okay. And, you know, you kind of develop the sense. And, you know, the guys who have been there longer than I was were great at it. And they all had their little, you know, cheat sheets, and, you know, their little, you know, they had their remotes with their presets so that they could move around and, you know, be quick about it. And as I worked there, I developed my own, and, you know, kind of got into the same rhythm as they did. So, yeah, getting way off topic here, but...
No, it's fascinating stuff.
What happened was this engineer decided that he didn't need me to run the machine. He was more than capable of running his own tape machine. And how dare I...
Famous last words right here.
Right. How dare I insinuate that he wasn't able to run the tape machine? And I was like, okay, you know what? It's all you. I'm just going to show you a couple of things so you don't get into trouble. And he's like leered at me. He's like, you don't have to show me anything. He's like, I know how to run a goddamn tape machine. And I was like, okay, good luck. So I just turned around, walked over to the couch and sat down and proceeded to watch him bury himself in mistakes, just one after another, just multiple tracks in record, the wrong track in record, in repro instead of sync, all the fuck ups that, we were trained to avoid or to be cognizant of and be able to get ourselves out of as quickly as possible. And he just, one mistake after another, and I could just see the exasperation building on Rick's face. Rick was, to my knowledge, has never been a shouter or has never gotten in anybody's face. That's just not his vibe. Very mellow, like soft-spoken, low-key guy. But I could see it.
So it's you, Rick, the cocky guy,
right,
and Anthony Kiedis.
Right, and Anthony's out in the room, and he doesn't really know what's going on, because nobody was explaining to him that there are all these fuck-ups going on. But, I can see it on Rick's face that he's just like, oh my God, this is fucking ridiculous. And so we get through the first day, Rick leaves. I can see him look over at me like, oh boy. And, I kind of get this look from him, and I was like, yeah, oh boy, you're right. And that's
a bonding moment, though, isn't it?
It kind of was, and I kind of knew that something was up. At the end of the night, I was like, there's no way this is going to keep up like this. They're going to have to bring somebody else in, And at that point, I still assumed that they would just find somebody else because that's what happens, And the next day, Rick's assistant calls me and she said, hey, are you available to engineer for Rick tomorrow? Ocean Way isn't available, so we're going over to Sound Factory. Can you go with him? And I was like, shit, yes. Okay, no problem. I'm in. And I called Ocean Way. I was like, I'm not available tomorrow. I'm going with Rick to Sound Factory. And there's silence on the other end of the phone. And she's like, what do you mean? I was like, they called me to engineer the vocal session. And she said, okay, well, when are you going to be back? I said, I don't know. I said, we're booked over there for the whole week. So I guess take me out of the schedule for next week. And she's like, okay, great. And then just the reaction from some of the other assistants was like, wait a second, what? You're doing
pure
what?
Hate, I'm sure.
Well, just like disbelief. And then, definitely some less than, nice responses. But I'd say for the most part, they were all kind of like, well, you know what? It's your funeral. Good for you. Good luck. Oh man, it's going to suck working for him. Oh my God, why would you do that? That's crazy.
Yeah, why would you?
Yeah, and I'm like, what do you mean? Why would I do that? I was like, are we talking about the same person here? And
I mean, it's easy for them to say that to themselves so that they don't cry over the fact that it didn't happen.
Right. And and from that point on, it was a pretty, more or less steady 8 years of working with him on various records. And, it was great. It was, the best experience I could have asked for. Learning on the job, on my feet and being able to think on my feet. That's what that taught me, was being able to think on my feet and being ready to, okay, how are we going to make that happen? Oh, it's 10 at night and we're having 10 people come in to do strings. Okay, well, I guess I got to set up for a string date. It was just kind of like, there wasn't even there was no way to say no to any of it. You just had to make it happen. And I think that was a really good lesson about, how to be a valued part of the team. Is you just figure it out. And, if there is something that just is beyond your control and and isn't going to happen, then you got to be straight with whoever you're working for and say, all right, here's what I've tried, here's what I've done, but I'm not getting what it is you need. So I need some guidance here. What am I supposed to do now?
The very first time that came up with Rick, like that you were not able to do what he had tasked you to do, how were you fucking freaking out? And how did you go about it? How did you go about making it cool?
Well, I just went with the, I'm just going to tell him how it is. I'm not going to bullshit him, because what's the point in that? What's it going to accomplish if, because we're all working towards the same thing here. And, I can't remember exactly what that event was, but, I remember going to him and explaining the situation. And he said, okay, well, tell me what you need to have happen. And I told him what I thought should happen. And he said, okay, then let's do that. And it was that simple.
So that's a good leader.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of misconceptions about him. A lot of people like to dog him because he has other people. Well, I guess because they think that he has other people, quote unquote, do all the work, which I think is total bullshit. I think that he's more like what a producer is for movies, combined with what a director does. But defining a vision and making sure that vision comes to life, and then working with the very best people who can go to work to make that vision, almost like a general, I think, from everything I know about him. And so everything I hear about him is just that he's such a good leader. Like when someone comes to you that you trust, who's working for you, and they say, I can't do this. Well, what do you need to be able to make it done? This and this. Okay. And then you just trust the person to go get it done. That makes for a great working relationship, whereas some people would have flipped out.
Right. Well, and I think it was also about being able to deliver on it, saying, well, if you give me this, this, and this, then I can make that happen. And by him saying yes, it's like, okay, well, now the onus is on me to make it happen. So,
yeah, absolutely.
There's definitely that pressure there. But you're right. It was like I think he's the type of person that once he's decided that he trusts you, then he trusts you, and he's good with that. So I think it's a certain person that that is able to do that, and and I felt like once you were part of that team, you were part of that team, and it was like that was it. You were, your opinions were taken and put into the equation, and that's how things got figured out.
Why would he have picked you otherwise if he didn't trust you?
Well, exactly. And, I've heard, the rumors that fly around the business about, the work stylings of, of Rick. And it's, I think the way I describe it is you either love working with Rick or you don't. You like how he does things or you don't. I don't think there's a middle ground there. And I think if you are the type of artist who likes what he does, then you're going to have a great experience. But if you're looking for a different approach, maybe a more hand-holding, then you might be disappointed. You might not get what it is you're looking for. So, nobody's going to please everybody. And, not everybody connects well with every artist. And I think that goes all the way up the food chain.
I mean, he has connected, though, really well with quite a few.
Exactly.
The track record is unbelievable.
Speaks for itself. Exactly. And I think that to deny that would be really, short-sighted. And, yes, he did count on, when I was working for him, yes, he did count on me for a lot. But you know what? I didn't see that as weird. I didn't see that as, oh, he's not doing anything. I just saw that as part of my job, and that's, I saw it as a team effort.
Absolutely. The general doesn't do the work of the people under him.
Right.
The general finds the right people and has them do what they need to do to get the objective taken care of in the big picture.
And, he always had an opinion. And I think, one of the most frustrating things about working with an artist or another producer is when they don't have an opinion about something, where where someone will say to me, oh, well, it's not right. It's like, okay, well, what isn't right about it? What is it that you don't like, or what is it that you would change? You have to give me some sort of, guidance. What can I do to make this more to your liking? What is going to accomplish the goal you're setting out to achieve? And Rick was always very clear about that, to me anyway. If he didn't like the drum sound, there was a reason he didn't like the drum sound. He's like, well, he'd say something like, the snare sounds like it's down the hallway. He's like, we need the snare closer. I need the snare right here, and he'd have his hand up to his face. And you're like, okay, I got to figure out how to get the snare drier. Mm-hmm. I need it more in my face. So, there was at least an opinion there. And, that to me makes the world of difference, because if you work with somebody who has no opinion, you're kind of like you're throwing shit against the wall. It's like, well, how's this? How's this? If somebody says, well, I don't really like the vocal sound. That's such a ball of nothing. It's like, great. Well, what are you looking for? And well, can you try something else? Well, something else what? You can't. It's like when you are mixing a track or recording something, you hear it, a certain way. You go with your gut. You go with your instincts. It's like, okay, I'm hearing it like this. That doesn't mean everybody's going to agree with that, or everybody's going to hear it the same way. And that's fine. It's all subjective, obviously. So what is it that you don't like about it? Is it too bright? Is it too warm? Is it too much bottom end? Is it too compressed? Is it not compressed enough? Is it too wet? Is it too dry? Is there too much delay? There has to be some sort of tangible thing that, you have to help me with, because otherwise, we could be here until, the end of time.
Just going to take a quick break, and I promise it's going to be quick, but it's important. I need to remind you guys, so please forgive me. This episode is brought to you by the URM Summit. 4 days of networking, workshops, seminars, and hanging out with your URM friends and dozens of the industry's best pros. It's November 8th through 11 at the Las Vegas Westin, and tickets are available right now at urmsummit.com. All right, back to the episode. I'm sure that also taught you the importance of specificity when you would then, later on in your career as a freelancer or just working in any of those scenarios, I'm sure that taught you how to properly present a problem to somebody else. Because I've learned this too. You can't, it's not just in production, it's in business too. You can't just go up to somebody who's been working on something and be like, this sucks.
Right.
You can if you want them to hate you or to mentally check out. But that's not a good way to do things. You might be giving a comment on something that you're not the expert on. So it seems to me like Rick hires people who are experts. Like he works with a series of experts to help fulfill his vision. I could be wrong, but that's what it strikes me as. And I think that like when you're running a business, it's the same thing. Like you hire people who are better than you at certain things that are crucial that need to happen, but that you might not be the expert on. So when you talk to them, you might be talking to them about something that, they spent 20 years to get good at that you don't know that much about. And so it is easy to just say that's wrong. That's the easiest thing to do, but it's the worst thing too. You definitely need to tell them why it's wrong and give some sort of, maybe you can't give them the technical solution. Like when I'm working with someone who codes, I don't know code for shit. So
Right.
I can't go in and say it's wrong because of these lines of code and I need you to fix them to this. I can't do that. But I can definitely say this is off because of this and this. We needed it to be more like such and such. I mean,
Right.
this is cool, but we need it to be more like this.
Right. I think you really need to be able to explain, and right, it doesn't have to be technical. I think
No,
but
it doesn't at all.
But I think a great artist is also a great communicator, because that's what
Absolutely.
that's what great art does. Is it communicates to other people. So I think, and I definitely feel like this has been my experience. I think the people who are more artistically comfortable, or more comfortable with with who they are, and are aware of what they're trying to do, are able to verbalize better what it is they need, or what it is that they're not liking about what's going on. I think that usually those people are better able to explain, well, I don't like this and this is why. Or, I was hoping that this could be more like that. I'm hearing more of this and that. I'm hearing, more ambience around my drums than I'm getting. Or, why isn't the kick drum, why isn't there more like attack on the kick drum? I want the kick drum to I want more impact from the kick drum. It's these kind of descriptors that really help me be creative, if that makes sense. I think
Totally.
what it is I do, and this profession, I think my creativity feeds off other people's goals. It's like, I want it to be like this. And then that's where my creativity comes in, where I need to make it like that. And it's not really how you make the sausage, it's the sausage at the end. It's how you got there. Or what, not how you got there, but what's there.
So it sounds like you love figuring out the equation for how to bring somebody else's vision to life.
Yes, absolutely. This has been my my line to most artists or bands that I'm meeting with is, I don't want this record to sound like Dave Schiffman. I want it to sound like you guys. I want to be invisible. I don't want somebody to listen to this and go, "Oh, Schiffman did this." That makes no sense to me. It's like, I'm trying to get somebody else's vision to speak the best it can. Somebody to be, a band to make their best record or be the best of themselves. Inserting myself into the equation sonically just seems completely out of line.
It sounds to me too like what you love is in realizing their vision, like almost that your vision is to properly realize a great artist's vision. Whether the great artist was Rick Rubin or whoever you're working with now.
Exactly. At the end of a record, the ultimate compliment is, we never thought we could sound this good, or this record has gone beyond our expectations. We never imagined it would get here. I mean, that to me is, the best compliment ever, because you've taken somebody's vision and not only have you achieved it, but you've excelled. You've gone past it. I mean, how could you ask for anything more than that?
I don't think you can. So I guess that brings up that, what do you do? How do you get through it when you're working with someone that doesn't have a very defined vision?
It can be difficult. I find those records to be the biggest struggles, because then you have to count on your own vision. And you have to.
I guess this kind of goes full circle to what we were first talking about with managers and publicists and labels, that you can't Like, you can't expect a publicist to create your story for you.
Right.
Like, you have to have a story for them to pitch the publicity outlets on. A manager, they can't manage a career that doesn't exist or that's not in demand.
Right.
You have to have that demand already, and then they can manage what you give them to work with. Just like you need to have that vision coming in from the artist, or you got to make one up, I guess.
Right. Or you have to find the commonality. You have to find, okay, what is it that, this artist is really looking to achieve? And then you have to go on, gut response. Is this getting this singer like to do the right thing? Or are they lost? Are they feeling this? Or are they just not getting it at all? And I will say part of it, like, working with newer artists and newer bands, there is definitely, there has to be a conversation at the beginning of the record. And I run into this part of the conversation many times where I'll be sitting with an artist or a band, and I will say it's mostly like newer bands or artists where they're like, yeah, like we really want the drums of Vampire Weekend, but we want the guitars of like System of a Down, and we want the vocal sound. And it's like,
that.
Holy shit,
Love that.
dude, you are just like, you just don't get it, And what I will try and say to these artists is, here's the thing. You can imagine how something sounds in your head any way you want. You can imagine heavy guitars with like there's a zillion Vampire Weekend drum sounds, but, you can imagine those two things together. Just because you can imagine it doesn't mean it physically can happen. When bands have this vision, they need to really think about the key of the song and the tempo of the song and the style of the song, and, kind of the vibe that they want to get across. All of these things have to be taken into consideration. It's like, if you have a big warm kick and your tempo is 175 BPM, well, that's just going to sound like mush. It's just the physics of it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I've had extreme death metal bands that play at like 275,
right,
with like double bass the whole time and blast beats, and just like a drum Olympics wanting to sound like the Metallica Black Album snare.
Right.
And it's like, you don't understand. This is not, like, if we actually tried to create the Black Album drums, which first of all, it's not going to happen, but just say it did, like, if...
Right.
If we were to manage to pull that sound off in 3 days, 3 days on top of that, and if you actually heard what extreme death metal sounds like with these kinds of drums, you'd fire me. Like, it's not what you actually want.
Right.
It's just not.
And that's the thing also, is when you're like, well, that isn't what you're looking for. I understand, but that, you don't want that. Here's what you want. Here's what you're saying. And, and there's definitely a more politically correct way to say that.
I have a hard time with that.
I get it, because sometimes I definitely get to the edge. I'm like, look, I'm more than happy to work with you guys to get what you're looking for. But at the same time, you have to listen to what I'm saying. And that,
Where's the line, though? Where's the line? Because I think that, like, what a great mixer, a great producer, a great engineer does is they take that fantasy sound and they make it reality. However, that fantasy sound from what they start with oftentimes changes once they get to work. And that's the same with songwriting and composition. I know that whenever I've had a song in my head at first, like a vision for it, after actually working on it, the vision changes because reality gets interjected into that vision. We all have to have some sort of a fantasy of some sort of what it could be. And some times I think artists just don't know how to translate it. That is why they hire you. So where's the line between when they're just being artists and they need you to help achieve that vision versus when they're just being completely ridiculous, like the Black Album sounds on Death Metal at 275?
Right. Well, that's a good question, and I think it's. I don't know that I have an answer because it really depends on the scenario. I think there's politics at play here, and one member of the band may feel a certain way, and the other members of the band may be saying, "Ignore him. Don't worry about him. He doesn't know what he's talking about." So,
Yep.
you have to, you kind of have to play the room to some extent and just kind of feel it out. And ultimately, look, you want everyone to be happy, and I want to be happy with the end result. It's just coming to that common ground. And I think, where I try and take it to is, if the Black Album drum sounds were the goal, I would say, I get it. You want an important drum sound, and I think this record needs an important drum sound, but let's make it your important drum sound and not Metallica's important drum sound. And I thoroughly believe that too. It's like, well, you know what? Metallica already made the Black Album. Why not make...
A while ago.
Yeah, exactly. A while ago. And most of it's triggers anyway. But...
little known fact.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And I don't think Bob Rock would tell you otherwise,
No, not Bob Rock. There's a lot of internet experts who will be like, anything with samples on it is bullshit. Just look at albums like the Black Album.
Right.
That's real drums all the way, no samples, blah, blah, blah. Because back in the day, people knew what they were doing and did shit for real. It's like, bro, they've been using samples a long time.
Yeah, since Wendell, that was Roger Nichols' drum machine that he used on Steely Dan records. It's been around forever. But I think the point that I try and make, and it's not a get off my back technique. It's true. It's like, I want to make a record with you guys that doesn't sound like Metallica, for example. I want it to sound like you. So that should be our goal. Let's get, important drum sound, yes, but it's your important drum sound. It is not the Black Album. And I appreciate that as the brass ring, so to speak. And, this is what we're shooting for. But put that into your own perspective of who you guys are as a band. You need to find out who you are as a band. And then that stuff starts to make more sense. I think that is a new band reaction. We want it to sound like the Black Album. I think once bands really know what they sound like, less of that starts to happen. And when I say know what they sound like, I think there's a bit of cognitive dissonance with new bands. I don't know. Are you familiar with that term at all?
Oh, yes.
That's and so you know what I mean. It's like where a band says, well, we sound just like Pink Floyd. And it's like, dude, you sound nothing like Pink Floyd. Let's just call a spade here. You don't sound like Pink Floyd.
Let me just give you guys the actual definition for people wondering what it means. I just looked up the actual textbook definition.
Okay, yeah, good.
Which is the state of having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes, especially as relating to behavioral decisions and attitude changes.
Yes.
So you think you sound like Pink Floyd, but you sure as hell don't.
And you don't. And not that you sound bad, like you're a really cool band, but you're not Pink Floyd. You don't sound like Pink Floyd. And that's okay. And I find that once bands kind of understand that and they know, all right, you know what? We really don't sound like Pink Floyd, but we're okay anyway. We still sound like a cool band. Once they kind of hit that point in their, existence, everything makes a lot more sense. And making records becomes a lot more of a it becomes a lot more creative instead of like chasing some non-existent dragon. It's like you're making records that sound like you. And if you don't like the way something sounds, well, then you change it. Then it's like, all right, well, you know what? I play way too many toms. I'm going to get rid of, 4 of my 10 toms, and I'm only going to play 6 toms now. or something
Only
like that.
6.
Right.
Only 6.
It's like, I'm going to make a difference because this is what I want to hear, instead of, here, you do it. It starts on the other side of the microphones. It's like, if you're playing, if you're hitting the drums like one drummer, but you don't want to sound like that, then you have to stop hitting the drums like that.
If you hit the drums like a jazz teacher, but you want it to sound like Dave Grohl drums, you better adjust the way you hit.
Right. There you go. Thank you. That you nailed it. It's and that's the thing that, I will have great in-depth conversations with a drummer about when we're starting a record. It's like, well, what are you looking for? What style? What are we going after here? See, here's how I'm hearing it. I'm hearing it a bit more like a vintage tone. So I'm talking about like an older set of drums, like an older set of Ludwigs with not necessarily any stuffing in the kick drum, like with a hollow kick drum, but tight, like a 22-inch kick drum, nothing big. How are you hearing it? Well, I really want the kick drum to be like super focused and tight and, in your face. Okay, well then my feeling about the drums might be off. So we need to adjust it a little bit.
Now, the question is, if you're discussing that with someone like Rick Rubin or a highly skilled engineer, then just saying those things like size of drum, type of drum, stuffing or no stuffing, mic choice, all those things, right?
Right.
Like, you guys are speaking the same language, so you can kind of get to, I feel like by just speaking that language and just being like, this is what I want, and then you throw out the scenario that I just said, like this type of this with that type of that, this recipe, and they say, no, that recipe's wrong. Maybe I'm thinking more this recipe.
Right.
You get to the final, you get to the vision. But what about when you're working with someone who doesn't have that vocabulary at all? I want them to sound like they make blood come down your face.
Right. I think then there's a little experimentation that has to happen. If your drummer doesn't have a lot of recording experience and doesn't know what the right setup would be for the type of sound he's going for, then you kind of have to guide them a little bit. If
I want it to sound like cannons, and I want to sound like I'm 48 feet tall. Give me that drum sound.
Right. So it's not a 26-inch kick drum. It's probably a 22 or a 24-inch kick drum. It's probably a hole in the front of the kick drum with some stuffing in it, but maybe not against the beater head. So you get some tone out of it, but you get weight, because what makes drums sound big is weight, is when you feel them hit. So, and the other thing that gives drums weight is tightness. Like a big ass drum room isn't going to give you big ass drums necessarily, if you're not filling up that room.
Give you big ass tails.
Right. So, sometimes in bigger rooms, what I've done in the past is run a PA system with the drum kit. So you send the kick drum and the toms and maybe the snare through the PA to hype up the room. And that's really cool. I mean, that's a great trick for that kind of drums. If you're looking to do like those big drums, like that's a great way to do it. Another way is to like keep the drum room tighter, because when it's tighter, you're hearing more of the drum and less of the ambience around it. And I think when you can do that, you can take that in mix and you can make that blow out more. You can make that punch through guitars harder. because there's more of there's more of it. There's more of it to hear. I think a super ambient drum sound on heavier music can get lost, depending on, the direction you take with guitar tones and bass, all of that. There's, all those factors kind of work together.
So if someone was to come to you with that kind of language, then it's almost like you just did. Sounds like you go to the recipe book almost, and it's like, we could try this, or we could try this, or we could try this, or we could try this.
Right. And so, you come with some suggestions and you see what makes sense. You also have to take into consideration budget. I know that nobody likes to talk about the B word, but
it's true.
It's true. And it's like, well, running the PA, that's great. We want to do that. Okay, well, we got to rent a PA and we need a sizable room. Okay, great. Okay, well, that sizable room is about $1,800 a day. And the PA is probably, I don't know, $300-400 a day. So $2,200 a day to record those drum sounds. I'm down. Who's paying for it?
Plus, are you hiring a drum tech tuner guy for that stuff?
Right, and that's another thing that I find super critical. Unless you have a drummer who really is comfortable, tuning his drums.
Just out of curiosity, what percentage of drum sessions have you worked with a drummer that you would trust all the way to just tune the drums and do it not just tune them okay, but tune them like album ready?
Surprisingly, it really depends on the style. It's like if you're going for like big rock drums, you really want to have a tech in there, only because it's a pretty arduous task. There's a lot to go through. It takes a little more time, and you really want to finesse stuff. It's really about getting in there like nitty gritty, and it's about a lot of, okay, well, let's try it with the coded. Yeah, not really feeling the coded. Could we try clear? Could we try clear with a dot? And these are like, these aren't like big tweaks, but they become important tweaks, because it's like, well, the coded don't sustain as long. Well, that probably makes sense because these songs are pretty quick. So, you know what? We should stick with the coded. Do we want to have skins on the underside of the toms? Well, yeah, probably. But you know what? We could try it without for this song. That might be interesting because it'll have more of like a tribal feel if we do that. It'll feel more like, Phil Collins drums if we pull the bottoms off. So all right, so let's try that. And when you want to kind of run through options like that, you don't want to necessarily throw it on your drummer. It's great to have another set of hands there who's like, okay, I'm on it. And he'll just go through and he'll set it all up. Or they'll be like, there's another kick drum that's set up differently. Or, okay, well, we can try swapping these toms out for those toms. You want to have that person kind of in your corner who will, mix it up for you or with you.
A real expert too, because
yes.
I feel like, like those drum guys, like the real good techs, they are to drums kind of like what a luthier is to guitar construction. Like,
absolutely.
It is their passion in life.
Yeah.
And God bless them because they have made my recordings so much better. I've really only worked with one or two that are just unbelievable, but they are, they're a godsend. And it's not just saving the drummer a lot of, from hitting too much and tiring themselves out before they can even play. It's also about your ears. If you're in there with the drum all day long hitting it, you're using up your valuable ear real estate for things you don't need to, and then it's going to make things take even longer, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. I think, you need to keep your drummer fresh as much as possible. But not excluding him from the equation, because
no, of course not.
What I've learned and now I just assume it is that your drum tech is going to hit the drums way different from how your drummer hits.
Absolutely.
And not necessarily worse.
Sometimes better.
Sometimes better. Yes.
You know what's funny? I have the drum tech, his name is Matt Brown. He's phenomenal, the one I work with the most. And, we would always take sample hits in every session, always, just for whatever reason. And, for whatever might come up where you might need it. I would always have him do it because 9 times out of 10, he just hit the drums better than the drummer did.
Right.
He's just perfect. Has just like the perfect hit. Because so much of how a drum sounds is the person playing it and how they play it, that I feel like someone who is obsessed with drums, like one of those drum tech guys, they have pretty much worked out that part of the equation too. They've worked out everything that goes into making a drum sound great. So oftentimes their ability to hit the drum is just fantastic.
Yeah, it's I've been lucky enough to work with a couple of drum techs who have forgotten more about drums than I'll ever know. There's a guy, Mike Fasano, who I've done a bunch of work with out in LA, who's brilliant and just so easy to work with. And you give him a goal. It's like, here's what we're looking for. Here's the sound we're going for. And he'll be like, okay, give me a second. And he'll go dig out the snare, tune up the toms, and it'll be like something like this. And, 8.5 times out of 10, it's like, it not only is it in the ballpark, but it's like, yes, that's right. And another guy that I did a ton of records with is a guy named Lee Smith, who used to own a company called Drummer Paradise. And that guy just knew everything. How did John Bonham get that snare sound? What was he using for this? And he'd be like, oh, well, that's a, and he would just like rattle off everything, down to like the skin. And be like, Jesus, all right, great. And he could make it all happen, or, during a take, he'd lean in and he'd say, sounds like the snare fell, the tuning on it.
Yep.
And be like, all right, let's stop. We'd stop and go out and say, okay, can we do lug locks? Lug locks don't really work on the snare. We're just going to have to earball it, And I'm like, okay.
My favorite thing is when Matt will lean over to me in a session and say, tell the drummer to do a half turn on the lug closest to him on the 8-inch tom.
Yeah, there you go.
Problem solved.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, those guys are rare but essential. It really makes all the difference. And I've done multiple records where I've been like, God, the drums they just don't sound good. What is going on? And then I have the tech go out there and hit them. And it's like, oh no, they actually do sound good. Okay, and and that's kind of taught me that it is so much about the player, and like the instrument really is secondary. That's for guitars as well.
Absolutely.
One of the greatest learning experiences I ever had about that was I did a bunch of work with the DeLeo brothers when they were a production team for a little bit back in the early 2000s. Dean and Robert DeLeo, who were the guitar and bassist for Stone Temple Pilots.
Yep.
Both awesome.
They're great.
Awesome guys and fantastic musicians. Like really, really, cream of the crop.
I remember back in the day, and I was a teenager in the 90s, but I just remember reading interviews about how out of all the bands from that era, they were considered like the musicians.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they were, as a lot of the other bands may have been awesome, but just like awesome bands. Like these guys were like real deal musicians.
They could have been studio musicians in their own right. They were completely capable of playing whatever. And we were working on and forgive me, but I don't remember the name of the band.
That's okay.
It was probably like 2002 or 3, and
was it one of their other bands?
No, it was a band that they were producing as a team.
Okay, got it.
And we're working on the guitar solo, and so Dean brings in all of his, his amps, his guitars, like his beautiful Strats and great old Tellys, and gorgeous Fender Tweeds and like AC30, like all the best and finest guitar amps and guitars you could want. And we're getting a solo sound for this one part, and it just sounds terrible. I'm like, what is going on? So I'm like, I'm telling the assistant, can you change out the mic? I like, it just sounds all like muffled and dead. Like, let's try a different mic. All right, sounds the same. Let's try a different mic pre. All right, is there pull the compressor off? All right, take the EQ out. Still sounds like shit. What is going on? And this whole time, Dean is kind of sitting with the soloist. And at one point, Dean's like, wait. And this is a complete different conversation going on now. So Dean says to the guy trying to play the solo, here, give me the guitar for a sec. Let me show you what I'm talking about, for a specific part. Mm-hmm. And he's like, Dave, roll the tape. Just, put me in input. So I put him into record, and the guitar explodes out of the speakers. Like, it sounds like God. And I turn around and I look at Dean, and I was like, what just happened? And that's when I put like 2 and 2 together. I was like, it's because then he gave it back to the guy who was trying the solo, and it sounded like the guy had oven mitts on. Like just no definition, no clarity, nothing going, no sort of solo presence at all. And that's when I realized it's got nothing to do with the guitar, the amp, or the pedal you're playing through. It's all the fingers and the fretboard, and how you dig into the guitar and how you approach the guitar. That's what makes the guitar sound. So if you put Dean DeLeo on a piece of shit Squier Strat going through a crate amp, guess what? It's going to sound like Dean DeLeo, no matter what.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying all this. We try to get this through to our students all the time, because I oftentimes see them getting really, really obsessed with this amp over that amp, and just too much about guitar gear. And I guess it's become an internet cliche a little bit to be like, it's the hands man, but it is the hands man. It really is. That's the reason that became an internet cliche, is because people who know have been speaking this truth for a while. And so the problem, I think, for people who are learning online is if they don't have somebody great to mentor with. One of the things that we do with like URM and now the Mix is we try to give them, because we work with real tracks and real producers, they get to see some of where the bar is at. But like for a lot of people, if they don't have a way to know where the bar is at, they might think they're really good at guitar when they're not even close to good enough. And so they'll say, but I am already awesome. Right. My hands are there, bro. Like I just have a shitty amp, and it's impossible to really get through to them because they don't have a frame of reference for what really good actually means. But dude, I know this is so true. You hand me John Petrucci's rig, it's not going to sound like John Petrucci. You put Zakk Wylde on John Petrucci's rig, it's not going to sound like John Petrucci. It's going to sound like Zakk Wylde.
Exactly.
And that's just how it works.
Yeah. There is no way around that. Obviously there are some amps that sound better than others, that work better with the style of music you're doing, of course.
Of course.
But at the end of the day, it's like how you hit that guitar, how you strum that guitar, or pick that guitar is how you get that tone.
Absolutely. So in your experience, well, no, not in your experience. How about in that particular story with the DeLeo brothers, what happened? How did that conclude? So once it became clear to you that it was the player, well, one thing that I've learned is It's kind of like with wedding photography. I have a friend who's a wedding photographer. He's a great photographer, does all kinds of stuff. But the weddings have been like, until he started doing politicians and athletes, weddings were like his thing. And one thing that he would always say was that the brides would always be like, "Can you make me look like I'm 30 pounds lighter?" It's like, yeah, here's my time machine. We're going to go back 90 days. And here's an exercise plan and a diet plan. Or we could just postpone your wedding by 3 months and lose 30 pounds. And I will make you look like you lost 30 pounds. So like you can only be what you are, right? That guitar player is not going to suddenly get amazing right there and then.
Right.
So what do you do? Or what did you do?
Well, I think, this may sound shitty, but you kind of have to lower the bar. It's like, all right, you know what? This guy isn't going to sound like Dean DeLeo. Let's just get him to sound the best he can. And I think what we may have ended up doing was like coming up with a harmony for the solo to kind of thicken it out. And, like kind of tailoring the part to what he was actually capable of. And I think not trying to throw some, something at him that was over his head. It's like finding the way to make him sound the best he could. And, that kind of goes around to my initial point. It's like you have to find a way to make the band sound the best that they can, because, you can't change the talent that you've been given to work with. You have to find the right place creatively that suits them, where they're comfortable. As another thing, when I'm talking to singers about, who are also the writer of the song, or even who's ever writing the song, it's like, write it, make sure that the key is so that your singer is singing in the strongest possible range as much as possible. Like, because if he's not singing like in the meat of his range and he's always straining to get it to sound right, well, you're going to have two problems. One is he's not going to be consistent, so you don't know what performance you're going to get that night. And two, he's going to blow himself out. And you're going to have a lot of canceled dates because your singer's blown his voice out. And, the other thing I like to say is this the key that you would play the song in when you get asked to play the Tonight Show? Are you prepared to sing the song like this in front of, 10 million people on TV? If not, then you need to consider changing the key.
Absolutely. Is this something that most artists you find go with? Like, if you ask them to change the key, do they typically just comply, or?
I think it's a 50-50 thing. And I think sometimes I'm wrong, and I will admit that and own it. Sometimes when I initially hear something, I'll be like, this sounds too high for you. Am I crazy? And sometimes they'll say, yes, you're crazy. I can hit this. This is going to say it. This is in my range. It'll sound great. And sometimes I'll just be like, okay, let's hear it. And I get proven wrong, and great, but it's, as the producer, it's up to me to bring that up, to at least open that door and have that conversation, because sometimes people aren't even aware. It's like, wait, what do you mean I can make this lower? Like, yeah.
At what point would you consider replacing a musician with a session player?
Oh,
yeah.
Boy. Yeah.
I mean, it happens. It happens. Like, at what point?
It used to be more so before the advent of Pro Tools, honestly, because
true.
Pro Tools lets you accomplish the impossible. Back when you were just recording a tape, it was more often that the drummer got the hook because he just wasn't up to snuff. And I've done a number of records, more than a couple with Rick, where the drummer is sitting on the couch in the control room while we're tracking drums. And I feel so bad for that guy. But, it's just like, I'd say most of them actually come around and go, you know what? I couldn't have pulled that shit off.
Man, whenever I've had that happen, they typically are relieved.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, with Josh Freese out there playing it, it's like, all right, well, no, you're not going to get there. You're not going to get there overnight, So Josh comes in and does your drum tracks in 2 days instead of taking, 3 weeks to get drums. It's like that kind of made more sense, didn't it? And, most times drummers will watch that and go, you know what, I've got some work to do. I'm not there yet. You're right.
So do you think that because this was more common back in the day before Pro Tools, that this whole thing about what people could play back in the day is a bit of a myth, because there were guys like Josh Freese that would play on so many people's records that there is a dude who could play. You hear him on like 70 records you listen to.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think more so than people know, because a lot of times these session musicians would play uncredited, and it was to maintain that myth that the band could play or that the drummer could play. And I mean, I remember starting out as an assistant back in New York, I would work on records where it was like, wait, is this a band or a solo artist? Because not one member of the band is playing on the record. It's all been replaced. And that was a pretty regular occurrence back then. Yes. Was it the norm? I don't know when it started to become the norm, and then it kind of dissipated as budgets dried up, or as people kind of, I'd say kind of like when grunge came along, like when the 90s, like when Nirvana like broke down the door, I think it stopped being more common. I think that was when there was a turning point.
Makes sense. But you just confirmed what I thought. I've always kind of thought that it was a myth. The whole people used to be able to play back in the day. And it's just like, not from what I've heard. From what I've heard, there were teams of session musicians who were on call in all the major cities who would come in and save records quite frequently. And that solo you think is this guy you love is not. It's this little Jewish dude who played this solo and this solo too.
Right.
Like I've been hearing about that for years.
Yeah.
So I've always felt like, the problems that bands have always kind of been there. Like there's always been the guy that can't play that well. There's always been those problems.
Yes, I think there has been, but I think they might be somewhat exacerbated now. But there is the workaround, and a lot of these musicians who aren't quite as competent know about the workaround, so they're less concerned. A drummer who is marginally getting by, with some work, they can sound good. With some editing, it gets a lot better. So something that wouldn't be acceptable, back when we didn't have that technology and they would be replaced. That really isn't a conversation that comes up now. It's all right. Well, you know what? We're gonna, instead of hiring a session musician, you're like, you know what? I need to bring in an editor to get this to the place where it needs to be, and that's the conversation that happens now. It's like, all right, well, I'm not going to have time to do all this. We need to pay somebody to come in and help us out, and that's the replacement to hiring a session drummer most of the time.
Well, point being that there is something that has to happen.
Yes.
In order to solve for that problem, and that problem's always been there.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It is a persistent thing for sure.
We talked about another one of these studio myths. I just think that earlier, the one with samples, I just think that people idealize the past, and and it's a common thing. I remember in the 90s, people used to think that they wish that they were around in the 60s, but I'm sure that people in the 60s were very, very stressed out with what was going on around them, and did not think they lived in the greatest era ever. I think that this is a common thing, and a few of the other studio myths that I've heard repeatedly are, guitar players now reamp, blah, blah, blah. It's all bullshit.
Yeah.
No, the reamping's been around since the 70s. Samples have been around forever, too.
Right.
Musicians have been sloppy forever, too.
Yeah. And I think a difference, and tell me if this makes sense. I think back in the 60s and 70s, like the cream of the crop rose higher. If you were not a good band, nothing happened for you. I think you needed to have a certain amount of capability in order to get above the fray. Now the fray is just massive, because with the advent of, recording in your bedroom, pretty much anybody who has a laptop can say, well, yeah, I'm a producer, I'm an engineer, and it just adds more noise to, the internet. More, you're looking for a needle in a stack of needles instead of a needle in a haystack now.
I think that there were sick bands back then and sick musicians, and there are sick musicians now, but I think you're right.
Yes.
The difference now, the signal to noise ratio,
yes,
that's what I call it, is kind of skewed. So it's a lot harder to find them. But I feel like and I could be wrong, but I have a theory that there's more talent now than ever. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that because of the internet, because now people who have a talent can find out about their talent, and the barrier to entry is low, so they can develop that talent. I mean, it's hard for them to get noticed because of the amount of noise out there. But back in the day, the resources to even find out if you had a talent were very, very limited. And so I'm sure that there were a lot of people who could have done something. And I don't just mean in music. I mean
in general. In
general. Yeah. I think that there was a lot of undiscovered talent, whereas nowadays, this is a perfect example. So I was listening to a podcast with a Navy SEAL who was a Navy SEAL in the 90s and 2000s. And he said that, when they did their selections and buds and all that stuff, that nobody was ever ready for it. Like, they were severely shocked when the selection program came around, because all people had ever heard was it's going to be really hard. But there were no specifics on how to get ready. But now high school kids have all this information on how to train for this. If you want to be a SEAL, this is what they're going to do to you. They're going to make you stay up for 5 days straight. They're going to make you run around with logs. They're going to make you do 5,000 push-ups in a day. All this stuff, it's known. And so there's training programs for how to get ready for that. And so there's a lot of kids going in to the Navy SEAL selection and training program ready. Not to say that it's not difficult, but they're ready. So they're coming in having at least discovered that they have a talent for this sort of thing. And I think it's the same with music. I think it's the same with everything. The only difference now is the fact that there's very few gatekeepers like before means that everybody has a voice, which almost means that nobody has a voice.
Right.
As opposed to before, where getting a record deal was like winning the lottery in a way. It was so rare, so close to impossible. But I actually think there's more talent now, just because or more developed talent now.
Yes, I agree with you on that point for sure. But I also see, it's a double-edged sword, because, I look at the singing contests on TV, like The Voice and American Idol. Exactly. Yeah. And you kind of scoff at it. And I agree with you. But technically, and this is how what I call lay people watch these shows, and they're like, but he's such a good singer. And, and I'm like, so what? What does that matter? When has being a good singer been the point of entry? It's the same with being a great musician. When has being a great musician been the point of entry? It's having something to say what was the point of entry. And I think what the internet has done is it's made a lot of people decide that they can do this and it's their something to say, when it's just, you know what, you have a very nice voice and you sing. Yes, you can sound just like Justin Bieber. That's great. But you know what? We've got a Justin Bieber and we don't need another one.
That's very, very true. But that's the noise I was talking about.
Right.
The noise ratio is pretty high.
Yeah. But I think that the training videos and the things you're talking about, you know, exacerbates that side of it too, because people watch these, you know, YouTube and how-to videos and cop that thing instead of developing their own thing.
That can definitely be a problem. However, I am hearing lots of artists now that are very, very original, very unique, who came up through the new system. I just think they're harder to find.
Yes.
I just think they're harder to find. There's just that much. You're right. The barrier to entry is low. So what you're getting is a lot of people who you normally would not have ever heard from, who clouding up the space for everybody.
Right.
That's the drawback of this. I think that there's the pros and cons to everything that ever happens.
Absolutely.
That's the big con.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're right. Like somebody who wouldn't have been able to afford to get into the studio and make a demo of what they do can now, you know, do that relatively inexpensively and make something that actually sounds, you know, more than passable. That sounds somewhat professional, you know, with very little, very little investment in, you know, financially.
So I'm a big fan of Billie Eilish. Are you familiar with her?
Yeah, sure.
I feel like she's a product of now. I mean, she's 17 or 18 now.
Yeah.
She's obviously a product of the modern era. And I know that she writes with her brother, and they did it through a home studio. And I think she's a fantastic singer. I like a lot of her songs. I wonder if she could have done it in the 90s. Like, I feel like she is one. People like her are the artists that are being created by this new way of doing things.
Yes.
Like, I wonder if she could have ever developed her talent when you did have to go to a demo studio just to put tracks down. If all she had was a 4-track in her basement with her brother, would they have been able to do this?
Well, I guess not really kind of knowing her personally or kind of her whole process, it's kind of hard to make that determination, because I think if she truly, you know, I don't know how her and her brother came to these songs, like how they wrote these songs, because, you know, if those songs exist in a simpler form, I think she probably would have found her way. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I don't know that the songs only exist because of the production, which is excellent, by the way. I mean, those records sound phenomenal. But I think they're also great songs, and that's the difference.
Oh, yes, for sure.
Know? So I think those songs probably would have found their way out in the 90s. You know, I will say, you know, I think, you know, women in rock, that has changed a lot as well for the better. And I think they're becoming better represented in this world. And it's, you know, it's women like Billie and, you know, others that have done that. You know, would she have gotten the same chance in the 90s? You know, that might have worked against her as well. You know, it's hard to say, but.
True. Back to what I said before, there's pros and cons to every bit of technology and every evolutionary advance in every era.
Right.
I do think that the con of the 90s was that it was, you know, you could have people who had so much potential who just had zero way to ever realize that potential,
right,
or to have a chance at a career.
Yeah.
Because it was so damn difficult to get out there.
Right.
Get started.
And the majors were like, they were the gatekeepers, and they held a lot of it back. And now, you know, they play less of a part in the development and breaking of an artist. So I think in that respect, there is, you know, it's a much more open playing field now, and it's a lot more of anything goes as opposed to a much more kept and orderly thing. It's it's also really noticeable in the way music is becoming genreless. There isn't there's less of a distinct, all right, this is pop, okay, this is alternative, this is rock. It's all running together, which I think is amazing, because I think it's
same here.
It's just good music. It's not good because it's rock. It's not good because it's hip hop. It's good music. And I think that's a great leveler in terms of what's great is great. And it's not about who's doing it or what style it is or anything like that. So,
has this made your job at all more difficult in terms of finding the essence of a sound when the sound of an artist can be very erratic or combining a bunch of things that historically didn't go together, basically genreless?
I think the challenge is, if you are making a full-length album, which is becoming less and less the case these days, is to make it feel as though there's a common thread through the whole record, to where I get it. I get how this artist can move around in all these styles and feel fluid. I think, Vampire Weekend is a great example of that. Haim is a great example of that, where you can't really peg them as one thing, yet the music kind of speaks to all different genres.
I love that. That's one of my favorite things about the modern era, especially because I come from the world of heavy music. And I'm in that world because how things have turned out professionally, but I love music from all over. However, I remember how rough it was in the heavy music world to do stuff that was slightly off genre or at all out of left field. Like, you'd get crucified, and that's really not there anymore. Right? There's always going to be elitists or purists.
Sure.
But the genre wars, I remember from even as late as 2007, but especially in the early 2000s and 90s, that's kind of come and gone. People just find bands they like.
Right.
I love it.
Yeah, I agree. And, you look at, younger people's playlists. Like, I have a daughter and she's 18, and I see what she's listening to. I see what her friends are listening to, and it's all over the map, and it's all in the same playlist. And I think that's informing how, music moves forward in the future, where, kids today, I hate that term, kids today,
because it's usually used in a negative context.
Right, exactly. But kids today don't see music in genre anymore. They just see it in what inspires them and what they get off on, what makes them happy. And you couldn't ask for anything better than that, I don't think.
I have a lot of faith, man. I have a lot of faith in actually the Billie Eilish generation. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of faith in them. I think that they're growing up smart, they're growing up talented, and they're growing up free from a lot of the mental, societal boxes that we put ourselves into in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even early 2000s.
Yes, I 100% agree. I hear some people saying, well, when's guitar going to be back on the radio? When's rock going to come back? It's like, it never went anywhere. It's just not how you remember it. It's taking on a new form. It's, what is rock now isn't rock of the 90s. It's different, just the way rock in the 90s isn't rock in the 60s. It's
or like 80s or 70s.
Exactly. It's like, you have to embrace the fact that it's what we consider rock is becoming different, and that's okay. That's like, that's part of the journey. If it went back to sounding like the 90s, it's like, well, what's the sense in that? Been there, done that. It's like, why are we shooting for that? We
already had those great bands.
Exactly. It's that whole joke. It's like, we already have a Led Zeppelin. We don't need another Led Zeppelin. We need something else, So,
well, I mean, bands are a product of their era, and the era is so much bigger than just the music and art in it. It's everything. And
right.
You can't recreate that. You can't recreate a time and place, because you would have to recreate the historical moment that you're in. It's not going to work. You can't take that back.
Right. Society informs the art. It's like where we are as a society is reflective in what people are trying to say creatively, or at least you hope so. And so there's no way it could be like the 60s or the 70s. It's like there's different issues out there. There's different things that people are responding to, that they're mad about, that they want to speak out about, or that, that's good. And that all has to come into play to make things feel relevant, that people can identify with. It's like, great music has a universal truth to it. It has a universal understanding where somebody can listen to it and they can put themselves in that song and go, yeah, I get that. That's me. Or, I see that. I understand that. And I think when you hit that is when you get something big, something that really catches on, when you can speak that universal truth.
I totally agree. That side of it is universal, but I think the stylistic part of it is the product of the era you're in. Almost like the vehicle in which that universal message is delivered in is the product of the era, and it is what it is.
Right.
If you were in the 1600s, you'd be working on Baroque music.
Right. Exactly.
So Dave Schiffman, I think this is a good place to end this. It's been fantastic having you on. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It was a great conversation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, man.
You've been listening to the Unstoppable Recording Machine podcast. To ask us questions, make suggestions, and interact, visit urm.academy and press the podcast link today.